you heal and that you free them from suffering. I pray that we would be reminded or learn for the first time that you still are at work in doing that you free us from suffering, that you have that power and authority. And so I ask that as we study your word, that you would reveal things to us as a whole corporately, but also as individuals as well. We each have our own things going on. And so I pray that you would convict us of things that need to be convicted of. I pray that you would remind us of things, encourage us, challenge us. Lord, may your kingdom be advanced through our efforts. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. We're going through the book of Mark, still the Gospel of Mark. We're going to be in chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. And you probably have gotten tired of me saying this, but I'm going to say it every time because vision is important. Our vision is to make Jesus visible in Anoka. That is why we believe we're here. And that doesn't mean that we don't believe anybody else isn't doing that or anything like that, but we believe that God has called us to do something really specific and particular here in Anoka. And as we're reading these stories, as we're reading through the Gospel of Mark, we're getting glimpses of who Jesus is, what he did on earth, and what he's hoping for us to do as well as we respond to this and say, okay, if Jesus were walking around on earth in Anoka today, what would that look like? And so that's why we're going through this gospel to see how do we live out this vision well. And so we're going to be in Mark chapter 5, but I want to read the Beatitudes just as we open this up. I haven't done this a whole lot in the past, but this is found in Matthew, and this is the beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and this is kind of his introduction to this long stretch of teaching and say, hey, I'm ushering in this kingdom, and this is what he says. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit. And catch, as I read this, he's kind of flipping their kingdom upside down, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That's Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 12, the Beatitudes. And that's kind of the essence of saying, hey, I'm here to do something. I'm here to flip this kingdom upside down. If you're mourning, if you're poor in the spirit, if you're seeking righteousness, those might look different than the culture you're a part of. And same thing as 2023. We see all these things happening in our culture. And if Jesus is going to be made visible in Anoka, we're going to see some of those things flip upside down, and people will say evil things against us or whatever else, or push back or say no. And those are all things to be expected because they're all things that Jesus himself experienced. And we'll actually see in this story that people laugh at Jesus. And so if you're a Christian and if you've ever been laughed at because of something you said, you're in good company. People laughed at Jesus. People pushed Jesus away. And so I want to, as we read this, recognize that those are things that we should just expect. And as we begin reading this passage in Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 21, I also want to remind us of just some of the things coming up, some of the things that led up to this point. Jesus has begun his ministry. And if you may remember, when we started the gospel, we kind of named it Jesus and his authority as the series. And we've kind of transitioned to Jesus and his ministry as we read about the ministry that Jesus has and what he's doing. And so you may remember we've talked about the parables of Jesus talking about the importance of having faith. And then it moves into like practical situations where they go on this lake and they're in the middle of the lake in the dark and the storm happens, right? And Jesus is sleeping and the disciples get upset and Jesus rebukes the wind and it's all still. And Jesus says, do you still not have faith? Like I've been talking about this faith thing. Do you still not have faith? And then last week, if you were here, you listened to Tim tell the story a couple times of Jesus restoring a demon-possessed man, a legion of demons, and rescuing this man and restoring him and saying, go and be faithful, go and follow me faithfully. And so Jesus, as his ministry is beginning, he's not only saying, blessed are all these people, and this is the kingdom I'm ushering in, but we're also seeing practical examples of what it looks like when Jesus comes across certain situations. We're seeing that Jesus has control over the sea and over the wind and over the creation. We're seeing that Jesus has control and authority over demons. We see that Jesus, in this story that we're reading, Jesus has authority over sickness. And so Mark chapter 5, verse 21 says this, as we continue the story. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him. This is common. We continue to see this right throughout the gospel. They're by the Sea of Galilee. There's large crowds. Everyone's starting to figure out, like, okay, this is Jesus. This is what he's doing. He's doing things miraculously, and people are responding in amazement. And so this is normal. And verse 22, then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, said, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. And so Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. Jesus was not great friends with synagogue leaders. Jesus, with his teaching and healing with authority, he was becoming someone that they really shouldn't associate with. And the damage had been done between the synagogue leaders and Jesus, and people were starting to plot to kill him. And so we have a synagogue leader, Jairus, and Notice he's first being willing to be seen by Jesus, right? So that's one thing that we could notice, that he's willing to be with Jesus in public with Jesus. And it shows kind of like how desperate he is. But then even beyond that, we see that he publicly bows at Jesus' feet and he begs for his daughter's life. And we see over and over again, Jesus, in verse 24, he shows compassion. So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. This passage, we're going to go through verses 21 through 43, so it's a little longer passage, and it's often called like a Markan sandwich. It's a sandwich of stories, and we'll see this throughout Mark more as well, where it starts with a story, and then it'll be interrupted with another story, and then it ends with the same story it begins with. And so we'll see that we've got Jairus, we've got a synagogue leader, probably a well-known, highly respected man that is pleading for his daughter's life and coming to Jesus, and then it's going to stop, and then while Jesus is on the way, something else is going to happen, and then it's going to go back to this original story, but this is on purpose. This isn't just like randomly when we start reading like, oh, something else is happening. This is all on purpose. Mark is trying to tell us something and to get us to pay attention to differences and similarities and see, okay, these two stories, how are they different, but also how are they united, and what is this story trying to tell us? And so I want to just make some observations right now. First, sorry, I can't see the verses up there, so if I look back there, I'm just making sure I'm on the right page. But I want to just make some observations right now. First, who's the main person of the story? We got Jesus, and then who's visiting Jesus? Who's coming? Who's wanting to see Jesus? Yeah, we got Jairus, who's a synagogue leader. His social status of this man, would he be low or high? High social status, okay. And what does he do in this story? What has he done so far? Yeah, he comes to Jesus. He begs, and we see in these stories, even when we go back to this, the disciples on the boat in the storm, the demon-possessed man, these stories, we see these situations that people are desperate and they're hopeless. And we see them coming to Jesus or Jesus doing something about that. And so he seeks out Jesus because he's desperate and he's hopeless. His daughter is dying. And what does he want healed? He wants his daughter, who is 12 years old, to be healed. So that's what we're reading about now, is just getting this glimpse of like, okay, what is he doing, and what is this Jairus wanting to do? And so this number 12 we'll see occur in the next story as well. So let's keep on reading in verse 25. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, or touched his clothes, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. This bleeding condition, some scholars believe it was a hemorrhage, which is like bleeding from a damaged blood vessel. And so you can imagine for 12 years of this bleeding that doesn't stop, the pain that she had to be in. She spent all that she's had on doctors who have not been able to do anything. We see her desperate. We see hopelessness. Same kind of feeling that this synagogue leader was experiencing. But let's make some other observations. Who's the main person of this story other than Jesus? We have Jairus first, and now who do we have? Yeah, a woman, okay? What would be the social status of this woman, do you think? Yeah, outcast, low. She was unclean. She wasn't supposed to be around people. She wasn't supposed to be touching people. People weren't supposed to be touching her. If you do that, you're now unclean. And so the social status is low. She's outcast. And what does she do in this story? She has faith. She says, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. She is desperate and she is wanting healing. And so she's seeking out Jesus in a desperate and hopeless situation again. Leviticus 15:31, as you may think, like, what does it mean for her to be unclean, or this social status? This is what Leviticus 15:31 says. The law that it was Jesus when he was going through the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you've heard it said this, and I'm telling you this, of saying, hey, this is how you're used to doing it, but with God's kingdom, this is how we're doing it now, or I'm raising the expectation. And so he's kind of pushing against these laws and fulfilling these laws. He says, Leviticus 15:31 says, you must keep the Israelites separate from things that make them unclean, so they will not die in their uncleanness for defiling my dwelling place, which is among them. Jesus says, you've heard it said here, and I'm here to show you. I'm willing to be around the unclean people. I'm willing to be around the people who are normally outcast. And I just want to make sure that we see the difference in these two stories as well as the similarities. The difference being, we've got a man with a high social status, a synagogue leader that would be respected, and then we have a woman who would normally be outcast, looked down on, and both of them are seeking Jesus. And Jesus is saying, I treat everybody with compassion. I care about everybody's suffering. I don't just care about the elite, and I just don't care about the poor. But as we see in the Gospels over and over again, he especially does care for the poor and the outcast, because this is what God's kingdom is all about, is inviting those who are often looked down upon. But we see Jesus encountering people in different statuses. Last story was kind of like the political agenda. Tim kind of referenced that of what that has to do. And now we see a man and we see a woman, and we believe that God created men and women equally, but we see Jesus now. And not only will we see Jesus heal a woman, but he'll actually, for the first time in this gospel, and the only time in this gospel, actually call this woman daughter, inviting her into the family. This is what happens immediately. She says, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And in verse 29, immediately her bleeding stopped. And she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. If you've ever suffered, maybe you're suffering now, or maybe you've suffered and have experienced that freedom, you can kind of relate to that. And at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd, and asked who touched my clothes. Imagine what it must have felt like to be freed from suffering for 12 years. Kelsey can attest that I don't handle sickness as well. Like, man cold is a thing in our house. Like, I get a man cold and I whine and I complain and I don't suffer well, but even having a cold is not suffering. But it is actually one of the things over the last 3 or 4 months as I'm reading books, this recurring theme of suffering continues to happen. Not because like I'm reading stories about people suffering, but because I continue to read, and a lot of times it continues to come up, this theme of what it means to suffer well as a Christ follower. And so it's just something that I believe like God is trying to work in me of. I don't think he's saying like, Rob, prepare to suffer or anything like that, but for my character of when something bad is happening in your life, what is your outlook, what is your perception, and how are you doing that? But I can't relate to what it would look like to suffer for 12 years. She spent everything to try to figure this out, to try to get healed, and she's just in this hopeless situation. And Jesus heals her simply by her sneaking up in the middle of the crowd and touching his clothes. And Jesus knew what happened. He says, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciples, you can see in verse 31, disciples, the pretty normal response for the disciples is like, Jesus, you see all these people. Like, why are you trying to figure out who touched your clothes, right? Verse 31, you see the people crowding against you, yet you can ask, who touched me? But Jesus, he kept looking around to see who had done it. He could have kept on walking. He could have been focused on, okay, well, there's a synagogue leader. His daughter is dying. If I go and do that and heal his daughter, I would become even more popular, and it would be a big deal, right? And I could maybe go viral. That is not Jesus' thinking at all. It's like, okay, I'm on this way to heal this daughter, and this other thing is happening. I'm going to stop. I'm going to pay attention. She's a woman who is deemed unclean, low social status. That doesn't bother Jesus. Jesus still stops and says, I have time for you. I want to care for you. I want to free you from your suffering. And so Jesus cares. He says, okay, I'm going to look around to see who did it. And then verse 33, which I think is just this beautiful verse. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, she came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear because she was unclean. Maybe Jesus was going to unheal her. Maybe she was going to be publicly shamed for being unclean and coming into the crowd and doing something. There's this fear of like, okay, what's going to happen when I tell Jesus and when I just open myself up to him? What is going to happen? So she's trembling with fear. Yet she told him the whole truth. This shows Jesus' sensitivity, that he cares for what she's doing, but then also it's a huge deal because we're seeing this courageous woman being willing to go out into the crowd amongst whatever her status would have been to say, I'm going to seek Jesus, and I don't care what the consequences are because I believe he's going to heal me. And in verse 34, another beautiful verse, after the woman falls at his feet, trembling with fear, tells him the whole truth. His response is not condemnation. His response is not shame. His response is not go away. His response is, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. He calls this woman daughter. And as we're looking at this story compared to the Jairus story, we have Jairus who's got a 12-year-old daughter that Jesus is on his way to go heal. We have this woman who has been suffering for 12 years. That Jesus has now healed and calls her daughter, right? And so we're making some connections here. This is why I believe studying Scripture is cool, because it's not just pages, it's not just words, but there's so many things done on purpose that we just don't catch when we just read it, check off the mark, and like, okay, I read that chapter, all right, I'm good, I'm going to go on to the next thing. But actually paying attention to what is happening here, this unified theme of regardless of what the social status is, what gender you are, what is going on in your life, the common theme here is that these two had incredible faith that Jesus would heal, and Jesus moves in action and actually heals. And so we have this story of, it says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Imagine just being in that situation, that woman, and hearing you be called daughter and being welcomed into the spiritual family. Jesus talked about the importance of the spiritual family before and announced this family of like, who are my mother, who's my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters? Who is this family? This is my family. These are my spiritual brothers and sisters. And so he's not only introduced this spiritual family, but he's inviting people into this spiritual family. Verse 35, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus. Okay, so we're moving back now. We've got this story, right? Jairus came up to Jesus, said, hey, my daughter's dying. You should go save her. Okay, let's go. Stop. This woman like touched my clothes and I could feel power coming out of me. And so I need to stop and figure out what's going on. And he takes care of that. And now Jairus sees these people from his house coming, and you can imagine what he's thinking, like, this isn't good. My daughter is with them, and they're rushing here. That has to be, bad news. And so while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. They said, your daughter is dead. Why even bother Jesus anymore? Why bother the teacher? Overhearing what they said, Jesus says, don't be afraid, just believe. A better translation, I think, of that is don't be afraid, but keep on believing, in the way that the Greek reads. Don't be afraid, Jairus. Just keep on believing. You just heard this news that your daughter is dead. You are hopeless. You are in a desperate situation. Just keep on believing. And then Jesus moves to action. And in the gospel so far, we've seen Jesus out of the crowd choose 12 specific people, ordinary people that are often dumb and just make mistakes just like you and me. 12 specific people to follow him. They weren't the elite. They were fishermen. They were the average people. And now he takes out of that 12, he chooses 3 people within that 12 as kind of his inner circle. And we'll see that throughout the gospels where he's got this inner circle, right? And it doesn't say like why he chose them, just says, in verse 37, he did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John. For whatever reason, Jesus was like, these 3, they're going to be in my inner circle, and they're going to experience and see things that the other disciples aren't going to experience. And verse 38, when they came to the home, so they go to the home, Jesus, Peter, James, and John, and they go to the home of the synagogue leader. Jesus sees a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly because the daughter's dead. That makes sense. Verse 39, he went in and said, why all this commotion and wailing? This child is not dead, but asleep. Jesus knew it was wrong regardless of what other people were saying, right? Jesus is all-knowing. He knows, okay, she's not dead, she's just asleep, and there's something that makes me feel better as a Christian, as I said earlier, but they laugh at him. Verse 40, they laughed at him. And after he put them all out, he kicks them out. He takes the child's father and mother and the disciples who are with him and went in where the child was. And he takes her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which is Aramaic, which means little girl, I say to you, get up. Once again, Jesus shows compassion. In verse 32, immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. 2 stories, all unified, both separate and unified all together, of saying, yes, we have this man, very different, basically completely opposite of this woman as it relates to or this girl of status and age, yet Jesus cares and wants to heal both Jairus' daughter and this woman. And this woman, low social class, this man and his daughter, high social class, but both 12 years old, or both 12 years something, right? 12 years old for the daughter, 12 years old, 12 years of bleeding for the woman, and they both are seeking Jesus, asking for healing. And so we see this beautiful story where these stories unite. And in both cases, the common denominator with Jesus healing these two is that there is remarkable faith. They trusted that Jesus would heal. They believed that Jesus would heal. And we know that, we might believe that Jesus heals, and we see that Jesus doesn't always heal, right? We see sickness, and we see suffering, and we see death, and we may ask why. And so I'm not saying that if we're experiencing suffering, it's because you don't have faith like this. I'm not saying that because that would be ridiculous. The reality is there's sin in this world, and sin has deathly consequences. There's sickness and there's death. But when I look at these stories, they tried everything that, they were out of options. So it's like, I've got all these things I could do. My only option now is Jesus. And my hope as a church, my hope as a community, as we tell people about Jesus, is that yes, it's not guaranteed that God is going to fix everything and do everything, but I believe that he can, and I believe that it's God's will that he does whatever it is that he wants to do, and that I'm responsible for doing my part. But I believe that Jesus is the ultimate answer to any hopeless situation or desperate situation. We often turn to addictions and we think, well, I'm just going to stop and I'm going to do this thing, or I'm going to join this group and I'm going to do this to try to stop this. And the reality is, I believe that Jesus is the one with true power. Those things might help. The things that we've set up in our culture and world do help. But the transforming power of Jesus, the forgiveness that Jesus has, the Holy Spirit entering inside of us and leading us and guiding us and teaching us and empowering us, that is the power that I believe we need as a church. And what it means to make Jesus visible in Anoka, I believe that this is what the community needs as well. That Jesus is alive, Jesus is healing, Jesus is resurrecting